Are we ready for what's next? Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine breathing new life into NATO, which has not only committed to turbocharging its eastern flank, but now more than doubling its borders with Russia, as Finland and Sweden join an alliance that's, well, rediscovered its purpose, you might say. We'll ask about the terms and conditions, what with Turkey lifting a veto threat in exchange for the possible purchase of U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets, how deals are done and alliances shift on the fly. Well, that illustrates just how much the world has changed since February the 24th. It's a test of wills that's got major players scrambling for support and the whole world wondering how war in Europe is not only reshaping alliances, but disrupting energy and food supplies. We're 4 months in. There's no end in sight. How far will it go? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at NATO raising the stakes significantly with that summit in Madrid. And joining us here in the France 24 debate, he's Germany's former ambassador to NATO, Joachim Birlich, professor at the European Business School, ESCP. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure.
Thanks as well to former U.S. intelligence officer Michael Pregin, who joins us from the Washington suburb of Arlington, Virginia, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute's think tank. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent, who we've managed to extract from the editing room. You're just back from Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right. My third trip there since the beginning of this war.
All right. And you're working on a piece
on the Chernobyl exclusion zone and the impact the Russian invasion had there.
Catherine Norris-Trent, who's been all over on this last stint inside of Ukraine, also joining us in this edition of the France 24 debate from Kyiv, Ukrainian member of parliament, Inna Sovsun of the Holos party. Thank you for being with us.
1, 2, 3.
All right, she's the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Before we look at the NATO summit, there's the big news out of Ukraine. The Russians quitting Snake Island, the strategic Black Sea outpost that was the theater of a dramatic standoff at the opening of the war. Catherine Norris-Trent, Snake Island. Now, there's two versions on this, but the Ukrainian one is that they forced the Russians out.
That's right. I mean, we know military operations had been ongoing there for quite a few days. Even when I myself, a week or so ago, was down in Odessa, that was ongoing. The Ukrainian military didn't want to give details because they said it was still ongoing and unstable. But today they've said that the last Russian troops there fled on 2 speedboats, and the satellite footage, we know that, of a lot of smoke coming off that island there in the Black Sea. The Russians, of course, have spun it a completely different way, saying that this is a goodwill gesture to help unblock the port of Odessa. Of course, the Ukrainian officials would completely reject that. The Russians saying also that the Ukrainians need to do more to demine the Black Sea port of Odessa. The Ukrainians put down those mines to try and prevent, any kind of sea landing by the Russians, so that, it remains extremely difficult there. And this is a very highly symbolic step for a lot of Ukrainians, because all Snake Island took on a big symbolic power as that initial resistance, that expletive-laden message which became famous at the beginning of the war.
It's on T-shirts now.
Right, T-shirts, mugs, stamps, it's pretty much everywhere, of them telling the Russian soldiers where to go when confronted with an offer to surrender. So this is a boost, but it is a small step if it's confirmed.
A small step if it's confirmed. And as Catherine was saying, there's a different narrative as to what happened out of Moscow.
This demonstrates to the world community that the Russian Federation is not impeding the UN efforts to organize a humanitarian corridor for the export of agricultural products from the territory of Ukraine. This decision will not allow Kyiv to speculate on the topic of an impending food crisis, citing the inability to export grain due to Russia's total control of the northwestern part of the Black Sea.
And we do have the connection with the Ukrainian capital. Inna Sovsun, thank you so much for joining us here in the France 24 debate. There you heard the Russian Defense Ministry calling this withdrawal from Snake Island a goodwill gesture. Your reaction?
Well, that is definitely ridiculous. We have not seen a single goodwill gesture from Russia amidst this war. Furthermore, if you read into Russian media, and I have double-checked on that, their explanation sound very different, particularly for the internal audience. For the internal audience, they are saying that, and I quote here, we did not withdraw. We took away our people because we couldn't withstand the attacks of the Ukrainians. That is the rhetoric that they are producing for the internal audience, for the Russians themselves, basically recognizing that they couldn't withstand the attacks by the Ukrainian army. So that is a win for Ukraine, a loss for Russia. Indeed, very symbolic. Not so much strategic importance, but still, even strategically, that is important. But symbolically, that is extremely important. So we are very happy about the news.
And what about the Russians now putting the onus on the Ukrainians to demine the Black Sea, saying it's up to you now to help get those grain exports that are so vital for the developing world out?
Well, what the world needs to understand is that it would never be safe to go through the Black Sea as long as Russian fleet is there. And asking anyone to go into the Black Sea to demine the territory while the Russian troops, the Russian ships are patrolling the territory is just a suicide mission. And Russians know that pretty well. What they're playing is they're playing with the sentiments of the countries that depend on the Ukrainian grain so much in Africa, in Asia, and they're trying to show a goodwill gesture to them, because I don't believe anyone in the Western world will actually buy what they're doing. But they're losing support in those countries as well, so they're trying to show that it's actually Ukraine's fault that they might be running out of grain might feel the hunger and might fade the hunger. So I think that is very much the geopolitical move, trying to keep the support of the African countries and some Asian countries who depend on the Ukrainian grain. But definitely it's still not safe, and it wouldn't be safe as long as Russia controls Crimea and keeps its fleet so close to the Ukrainian border.
Michael Pregent, you have Snake Island back in Ukrainian hands, or at least the Russians withdrawing from, waiting for confirmation. On the same day when you have in the east a local governor saying that the situation is dire on the front lines in the battlefront city of Lysychansk. A good day for Ukraine or mixed?
Every day that Ukraine holds on is a good day, but it is mixed. Snake Island, a clear victory, shows what can happen when American weapons get in the hands of Ukrainians willing to fight and push back. But the Donbass and Luhansk regions, that's where Putin is focused. That's where he's been focused the whole time, with those paramilitary units that were already there. That's where Putin's artillery, missiles, and rockets do the most damage. And that's why it's important for the United States to continue to push in those counter-fire battery systems, those counter-fire battery radars, to be able to punish Putin's artillery that are leveling these cities. They're basically killing civilians. Russian artillery is the strongest weapon on the battlefield, and the American weapons that are entering Ukraine are there to counter that. And that's the most important fight to come.
Most important fight to come, and that news from the battlefield reaching a NATO summit that organizers hailed as historic, what with a 7-fold increase in troop commitments to the alliance's eastern flank. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
The NATO summit marked the biggest shift in European security in decades, with Sweden and Finland hailed as candidates to join the organization after Turkey no longer threatened a veto.
Finland and Sweden will become members of the alliance. We are there to protect all allies, and of course also Finland and Sweden, and we are prepared for all eventualities.
Sweden and Finland will sign the protocol to join on Tuesday. All 30 NATO member states will need to ratify their request for accession.
Particularly thank you for what you
Biden
did.
on Wednesday thanked Erdogan for all the work he was doing, not just on Sweden and Finland, but also trying to secure grain supplies.
Grain out of Ukraine and Russia. I mean, you're doing a great job. I just want to thank you.
Before leaving the summit, Biden said he backs sale of F-16s to Turkey and said he plans to announce more military aid for Ukraine in the coming days.
We provided Ukraine with nearly $7 billion in security assistance since I took office. The next few days, We intend to announce more than 800 million more, including new advanced Western air defense systems for Ukraine.
Britain and France, too, pledged to send more weapons, with allies saying they would support Ukraine for as long as it takes. NATO aims to have more than 300,000 troops on high alert from the middle of next year on the eastern front of Europe. While Russia is presented as the most significant threat, China, in a strategic document for the next decade, was also singled out as posing challenges to NATO's values.
Joachim Bitterlich, NATO, it's interesting because when the summit began, the focus was on that eastern flank that we saw on that map. As the summit concludes, all roads seem to lead to Ankara, or Istanbul, you might say, with the Bosphorus Straits. Turkey is suddenly the player that everybody's watching.
Well, Turkey has always been a specific player, a special player in NATO, at any moment. Turkey has its importance at the southeastern flank of NATO. It's clear. It has always been clear. Turkey, from time to time, is playing with this. It's clear too. And we are in front of a year of elections in Turkey. Please don't forget. And Erdogan wants to win these elections next year. And therefore is doing all to underline Turkey's importance in the region for NATO and with regard to the Americans.
All right, so this sort of a four-way deal that we've seen unfold, yes. Turkey lifting its veto objection for now, and in exchange, this verbal pledge by Joe Biden, this push to sell F-16 fighter jets that Ankara has been asking for. Of course, that has to go to the U.S. Congress.
Yes, because America, the U.S. had been stopping selling fighters to Turkey because of Erdogan's plans and execution of buying a Russian air defense system to protect his palace in Ankara. And therefore the Americans stopped certain deliveries of arms. It's normal too. But please, Turkey is one case. Go to India. We will have the next cases. Same nature, same style. America and the Russians in, and we have to see how the West will be able, let's say, to overcome these difficulties.
And in the face of what's going on in Ukraine, it's time to lift objections to selling those weapons to Turkey?
I've nothing against lifting the ban on these weapons in favor of Turkey. Turkey is always playing in a hard way its cards. It's well known. I've seen this in NATO. I've seen this before in my political life. Always the same story. Turkey tries to be, let's say, the partner in the Middle East. Turkey has been on the wrong side for a certain part. For example, when you look at the reform movements in the Middle East, Turkey has, betraying itself, if you want. Turkey has not been, let's say, on the top of this movement. But we, Western nations, we should help Turkey to be with us and to be a strong partner. It's important for us.
Michael, President, you agree at this juncture in time, what with Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
I agree that Erdogan has been leveraging his position with Russia and the United States. The S-400 question was the reason we didn't want to give him F-16s, because with S-400s, you can defeat the countermeasures of the F-16, and Putin would, by extension, learn how to take out American aircraft. It was the F-35 that we stopped also. Yes. We need to be concerned about those things because, Finland and Sweden aren't automatically in NATO. We've agreed to start talking about it. So Erdogan can still veto at any point in the future. And Putin has leverage with Erdogan based on what they've done in Syria, based on what they've done in Libya. And Erdogan sees himself as a kingmaker in the Middle East right now. And it's a position that I think the United States needs to consider. I agree that we need to get Turkey back into the fold, but I do believe Erdogan is an obstacle.
At this juncture in time, though, of course, a deal with Turkey means he lifts that veto threat, and it means that the NATO allies more than double their land borders with Russia, what with Finland joining.
Yes, that's crucial. we saw early mistakes made with Ukraine. This is an opportunity to basically make Putin regret what he did. But the one lesson that we need to keep in place is we need to get those air defense systems in now. We need to get that counter radar to punish Putin's artillery in now. We need to get those weapon systems in now to these emerging NATO countries. But we also need to look at Georgia and Moldova and start getting assets in there. Putin, we've heard, that winter is coming. Zelensky said this. We need to win the war by winter time, and Putin's being strategic now. He's waiting. Putin probably gave the nod to Erdogan that it was okay to say this now, just to buy some extension. I agree that it's important, to add more neighbors and more NATO allies. But what does Putin do then? And we need to look at what Putin thinks he can get away with over the next 2 years.
Ines Hofsson, when you look at what's best for the Black Sea, how should NATO handle Turkey?
Well, Turkey has truly been trying not to say what its position is. It has been trying to play the role of the mediator. At some point, it has even been partially successful, as much as any negotiations with Russia could be. But truth be told, Turkey is a tricky partner for Ukraine. It has been helpful. We are grateful for them more or less controlling the Black Sea and not allowing any more Russian fleet into the sea itself. That is the positive sign. But other than that, I cannot say for 100% sure that Turkey is on the Ukrainian side. Turkey, and I agree over here with the previous speaker, is playing hard and it's playing its own game. And that is why we need to make sure that Turkey is happy. But we also need to make sure that Turkey is playing together with the NATO member states, and in that it recognizes, as NATO did, Russia as the major threat to the NATO, and that is tricky right now because Turkey has trying to balance out and to be the mediator, not so much a part of the conflict, supporting Ukraine's side 100%. It can work sometimes, but I think right now Russia needs to see that it is completely isolated, because indeed we are now in the waiting game. Everybody is waiting for October. Everybody's waiting for the winter to come, and right now, if the European Union is not so much willing to take tough actions against Russia, still hoping that maybe there will be some sort of deal by autumn, and maybe they will get back to business as usual and continue buying Russian gas. And that is something that needs to be discussed. And if European Union manages to stay strong against Russia, particularly with this issue of Russian gas, then it can also talk to Turkey. But if European Union is kind of also trying to be, a little bit away from the conflict, not taking sides or not taking the half measures, then it's difficult to expect that Turkey will do that as well.
All right, that is an important point of leverage for the Russians. Quick word on this, Joachim Birolish. Italy this Thursday saying its storage capacity on natural gas, it's heavy importer of Russian natural gas. Right now it's at 90%. Or expects to be at 90%. Sorry, it's at 58%. Expects to be at 90%.
Germany is at 60%, actually.
Right. Mm-hmm. If the Russians don't reopen the tap after summer maintenance on Nord Stream 1, what's Berlin's position then?
Germany would come into a critical position, but I don't think that the Germans would leave the position of a common position of the Europeans. There's no blackmail at the end. Germany would suffer, the German economy would suffer, but I don't think that the Germans would concede anything to the Russians. Putin is trying to test this, yes, but on the other hand, I don't think the Germans would give in here. And they are prepared, let's say, to suffer to some extent. I think it's clear today. But please, one remark to Sweden and to Finland. In German, there is a proverb saying, don't praise the day before the evening. This agreement, this protocol has to be ratified by all parliaments. And there's the Turkish parliament. And I think Erdogan will exactly observe what Finland and Sweden will do with regard to PKK people.
Yeah.
Their action. And they will be observed till the very last moment. Please don't forget. And by the way, Black Sea, it's strange. I'm a bit puzzled. The day before yesterday, I saw a message by Draghi, the Italian, telling that the whole operation of getting out wheat exports from Ukraine, from Odessa, was not to be as difficult as many people had been forecasting. Who is telling the truth here? Some people were even expecting an agreement with Guterres these days. What's the truth about mining and demining in the Black Sea? I don't know it. I would like to know it.
It's a difficult one, particularly also finding out who would insure these ships to go through the Black Sea at this time. You heard Ina Sovsun there talking about how Russia's president needs to be isolated. Well, he this week is showing that he too can attend summits. His first foreign visit since the invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin traveling to Turkmenistan for a gathering with leaders of countries who have borders with the Caspian Sea. Vladimir Putin, by the same token, well, sending his calling card to Finland and Sweden.
We don't have problems with Finland and Sweden, such as we unfortunately have with Ukraine. But they should clearly understand that they didn't face any threats before this. If NATO troops and infrastructure are deployed, we will be compelled to respond in kind.
Catherine Norris-Trent, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting, Francois. I was speaking last night with a Swedish journalist friend, and she was saying about the very mixed feelings in Sweden about joining NATO, saying that people were nervous about how Putin would react. They're nervous about doing a deal with Erdogan. They're nervous about where that could leave the Swedish community and being held over a barrel. So while people support Ukraine and want to take action against Russia, it's a bit of a mixed picture in public opinion there, she was saying. So that's another angle to look at. I mean, the Swedish politicians have clearly signalled that, their willingness to join NATO and did that very quickly, but it's a big sea change there in those countries as well.
How much of a threat is it that we're hearing in those words from Vladimir Putin, Joachim Birlich?
I don't think there is an imminent threat in the sense of a military attack or something like this. For him, it's a new situation, please. Up till now, he had not to put any protection near the Finnish border as counter-protection against NATO. Nothing till today, especially Sweden, who was, let's say, the most neutral, if you want, more neutral even than Finland to some extent. Nothing. Today, he has at least to show at home that he is protecting that border, that new border. And we have a case, an ongoing case, with regard to Lithuania, to the transports of the Russians going through to Kaliningrad.
Let's talk about that. This week, Lithuania's government the target of cyber attacks attributed to Russia. Moscow denies this as Vilnius enforces EU sanctions applicable to that Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. NATO's nightmare scenario has always been a war where Russia grabs what's known as the Suwalki Gap, those 65 kilometers that separate Kaliningrad from Belarus, that would cut off the Baltic states, a threat that Lithuania's foreign minister, speaking of France 24, says, well, he's learned to live with.
It's EU ban on EU sanctioned goods, so we're just following the rules. And we'll continue to do that because we're a law-abiding country in EU. But I think that one of the weapons that Putin is using is fear, especially against the West. So I don't think that in any case we have to tremble when they are saying something. They will say in the future. They might harass us. They might do something. But we have to be prepared. And our strength is our preparedness.
Michael President, how dangerous is the situation right now in the Baltics?
Well, Putin's testing red lines. Remember, Putin's been very comfortable attacking the United States with cyber attacks. And the president's response was, just don't attack these 16 to 20 sectors of the American economy. But that tells Putin you can attack those other sectors that weren't mentioned, those other areas. So Putin continually tests red lines. Yes. NATO has said, the president has said, that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. But we won't do that in cyber, right? But what else does that tell Putin? That tells Putin that you can go after non-NATO countries like Georgia and Moldova. And we initially told Putin that he could do almost anything within the confines of the Ukrainian border. And those messages to him just give him a green light to continue. So he's testing, he's seeing if there is resolve, he's seeing what he can get away with. And with every inch that he takes, he tells his following in Russia that we're testing.
You heard Gabriel Landsbergis, the Lithuanian foreign minister, effectively saying, look, we know when you're bluffing.
Right. He knows he can't move in militarily. That should get NATO to stand firm against that. But he's testing the waters, and a cyber attack is testing. He's been able to do that to the United States with impunity. So why wouldn't he do it to a new NATO country?
When the war began, Ina Sovsun, the prediction was that a lot of this would be cyber warfare, and there have been attacks in both directions. But what's your feeling, Ina, right now, more than 4 months in on that score?
If you don't mind, I will comment shortly on the Putin's reaction to Finland and Sweden.
Sure.
Because that's actually very interesting. Because what he said is that he doesn't mind it. It's not a big problem. Even though previously he was actually saying that this is a problem to Russia. And this is very similar reaction to what happened when Ukraine got the candidacy status to the European Union. Because during the whole springtime, the official position of the Russian government was this: we do object against Ukraine getting the candidate status. And then suddenly, when it became obvious that the decision would be positive, and we are very happy about that and grateful for that, the rhetoric of the Russian state changed, and they said, well, we don't mind that. So I think what we are seeing is that when Putin is seeing that things will definitely happen, he is trying to play down the level of the decision, to play down that it's not a big issue that the Sweden and Finland are joining NATO. He's selling that mainly to his internal Russian audience, saying that, it's not such a big deal. The same as he did with Ukraine, because it was just a stark difference between like 3 weeks before we got the candidacy and then the days when the candidacy was announced. The rhetoric has changed completely. So I think he's trying to play down for his own audience to show that he's not losing geopolitically, while he clearly is in terms of isolation. And then getting back to your question with the cyber attacks, we are seeing that pretty often over here in Ukraine. They're trying to track what is happening internally in the Ukrainian government, in the parliament. From time to time, they try to put down some of the websites of the Ukrainian government or some institutions over here. But truth be told, they actually failed to deliver big results. And actually, the hackers working for the Ukrainian side, we cannot say whoever, but for the Ukrainian side, have been much more successful. Because from the first weeks of war, what we could see is the hackers who were intervening with television broadcasting and broadcasting messages in support of Ukraine on Russian television. The hackers who are destroying Russian websites or putting down the messages on those websites saying that this war is killing Ukrainians, it's unjust, unfair, and so on and so forth. So I believe what we are seeing is that in terms of intellectual warfare, a country which is a dictatorship cannot really rely on its intellectual resources, because in order to have people who can think smartly, they need to be free to think, and Russia doesn't provide such a background for people to think, to create independently. That is why actually their hackers have not been so strong as everybody believed they would be at the beginning of this war.
Joachim Birulich, is this the same Russia as the one that Vladimir took over from Boris Yeltsin more than 2 decades ago? And is it the same Vladimir Putin?
No. But I think Russia was in a weak position, let's say, around the year 2000. Internally weak by, let's say, an economy directed by oligarchs, by a certain corrupt system, difficulties to get enough food into Russia around Christmas, etc., etc. What Putin has been reaching is stabilizing Russia internally first, and then preparing step by step, let's say, not only stabilizing Russia, but coming back to his, let's say, classical goal, I want to be treated at the same level as the US, as a world power. What does this mean? Is, first of all, for me, the red line has been from the beginning the Ukraine. It's for me a matter of fact. The red line is not, let's say, the eastern flank of NATO. It's not the Baltics or Poland, nor Romania. The real red line for the Russians has been from the beginning, in my eyes at least, and I've been talking many times to them, has been the Ukraine case. And they have been, let's say, preparing this step by step. We may discuss now about the Western policy during these years, but it's a matter of fact. Let's say Russia, to some extent, is back, but now under total pressure.
All right, and this is something you're saying that you've been seeing for years, if not
yes,
decades.
Yes.
So
I have been expecting
how did
the attack
people
against
misread
Ukraine at latest from 2019.
You'd been expecting it since 2019?
Yes, I was sure from this date. May 2019, I was
Why
sure.
were so many world leaders then not expecting it and caught off
Well,
guard?
no one was believing it.
Why?
No one was, all people were thinking, even Ukraine internally, people were thinking, no, we will not attack. And for me, it was clear. And even in Europe, people were thinking, what, the CIA is thinking they will attack? No, the CIA is not credible here. The CIA was credible. He's right. But the CIA has been noting. And we were just not believing it. We were just, let's say, remaining in our, let's say, pacifistic thinking of, let's say, a status quo in Europe. And hoping that we could be able to integrate, to some extent at least, the Russians. We were still on the basis, what I call, of a NATO-Russia agreement of 97. It's strange. And please, and the Germans were, let's say, in that position, thinking the Russians have been always reliable in gas questions, and therefore we should trust in them. And please, even Mrs. Merkel has been underestimating this change in Russia. Not only she, but others too. And I think we have been waking up, let's call it a bit late. When I tried to publish in France the alternative solution for the conflict, before the conflict, the journal did not want, the newspaper did not want to publish it. Because they were thinking Bitterlich is becoming crazy, speaking about war.
And war we have. NATO now, though, definitely woken up, as we said at the outset, with this sevenfold increase in troop pledges to its eastern flank, pledging more support for Ukraine, sending in more weaponry, as we've seen with the retaking of Snake Island. But it's not enough yet to thwart Russia's scorched earth policy in Ukraine. But with the flattening of frontline cities and the targeting of civilian areas like here in the southern city of Mykolaiv.
In recent days, there have been more and more strikes on residential blocks and civilians. We're ready. We're ready to do our job.
German artillery.
And Catherine Norris-Trent, this scorched earth policy, you've seen it in your reporting. It's very hard to counter when you have one side that's ready to use its own forces effectively as cannon fodder.
But they're just destroying towns and cities, especially in the Donbass. So they're going block by block, street by street, and just pounding cities with artillery, very imprecise artillery often, and just destroying the cities, very little regard to human life, and then advancing in with street fighting. And this is a pattern that's just become more and more confirmed as this war goes on. Mariupol, the state of that city, if you look at the Donbass, Severodonetsk, and those towns reduced to rubble. So this is something that it's just a clear pattern. Kharkiv, the city in the northeast there, just constant shellings when we were there of clear civilian areas. This past week, the shopping centre in Kremenchuk in central Ukraine there as well. So this is something that, of course, the Russians are denying it, but this is happening on the ground, and this is a strategy they're pursuing, and they are pursuing, they imagine, with impunity. And people are extremely worried about how this will go on. And this is why we've seen these repeated, more than daily calls by Ukrainian officials stepping up over past weeks for more heavy artillery, more rocket launcher systems to get to the front lines quickly. Now, some of them are starting to arrive at the front lines. Well, there's a question about numbers. The numbers that the Ukrainians were asking for are huge. And so far, Western allies have not delivered the kind of numbers that the Ukrainians are asking for to the front lines. And Russian troops are advancing in the east of Ukraine, slowly, painstakingly, with massive destruction. But they are advancing. It's not enough. It's the weapons supplies that the Ukrainians are asking for that hasn't come through in order to be able to stop that Russian advance as things stand.
Ines Sofsun, can the momentum swing? Can the momentum swing soon? Like you were saying to us earlier, next winter is a deadline.
Well, I will just very much agree with what the previous speaker said, because particularly the last week has been very difficult. We have seen lots of shelling of residential areas. Less than a week ago, the Russian missile hit a building, a residential building over here in Kyiv. And then in Kharkiv, actually, a very personal note, they destroyed my primary school. The last week. It's completely destroyed to rubble, and it's just painstaking for me to see. This is the school that I went to, and then suddenly it is completely destroyed. In Kremenchuk, a friend of mine has been in the shopping center literally 10 minutes before the attack, and I talked to her, and she's terrified. She's crying all the time because of what she has seen. She has seen people being burned alive, and she could have been one of them if she were not lucky, if it happened 5 minutes earlier. I think what Putin is doing right now, he's trying to scare everybody. He's trying to make sure that as Ukrainians are starting to come back to their home cities in Kyiv, in central Ukraine, in western Ukraine, he wants to terrorize the civilian population. He wants to say that nobody is safe over here. And that constitutes a terrorist act. That is why Russia needs to be recognized as a terrorist state with all the legal implications that it implies. But of course, the major issue right now are the weapons delivery. I'm talking to the military on the east. All they're saying is that for every piece of artillery, of heavy weapon that we are getting, Russians are getting 5, 6, or 7. This is the disproportion that we are seeing. And of course, Ukrainian army is much better trained by NATO instructors for the last 8 years. It is much more committed. It is much better organized. But the level of commitment doesn't matter if you are being shelled by the artillery. So right now, the biggest question is artillery. And unfortunately, the big promises are not delivering right now, particularly from the Americans. We have been very happy to hear about the $40 billion aid. About half of them was supposed to go for military support. About $2 billion of that have been used so far. This is ridiculous. We need those heavy weapons right now to make sure that they cannot progress any further. But we are not getting that, unfortunately. And that costs us dozens or sometimes hundreds of lives every day, unfortunately.
Michael Pregen, how fast, realistically, can heavy weaponry come from the time it's pledged and the time that you have agreements in the U.S. Congress like we had recently to the time they actually get to the battlefield?
Well, we're not able to fly it directly into Ukraine. We all know that. So we have to put it into Poland. But Russian intelligence is watching. So they've been watching these logistical convoys come across the border. And they've been focusing on weapons depots. They've hit weapons depots where a lot of this U.S. heavy artillery equipment has come in. So the Russians are focusing on the equipment that's coming in and making it a priority to target it. So we got to stop telling the Russians what we're sending in, and we got to find different ways to get it in so that it can be used. Because like your previous speaker said, the ratio now is about 1 to 7. For every one piece of American equipment, the Russians have about 7. We have better capabilities, more standoff, but when we get it in there, it has a signature. You can see it when it's coming in, and the Russians are targeting that. So it's really hard to get that in place unless we just say, hey, listen, we're going to start bringing this in. We're going to airdrop it in. We're going to bring it in, and we're going to defend those bases with air defense systems, counter-rocket systems. So that's the problem right now. We need to get it in, and we also need to start getting it into the places like Georgia, Moldova, Finland, and Sweden also to get it there pre-positioned to be a deterrent for Putin. Because Putin thinks he has 2 years to do whatever he wants. And we need to change that thinking, that dynamic.
You say 2 years?
Yeah, the Russians had a front row view of the Biden administration's failures in Vienna with the Iran deal, failures in Afghanistan through Doha. So they had a front row view. They've actually been the intermediaries in Afghanistan and with Iran with the JCPOA. So there was a calculus. What can we get away with during the Biden administration? So when I do say 2 years, I think that Putin, I think that Xi Jinping, I think that Iran all believe they have 2 years to get all they can under the Biden administration.
But won't it be even easier for Russia once, if ever, Donald Trump returns to office? We know he'd like to run again in 2024.
Yeah, so that's the narrative that Trump was weak on Russia. But if you actually look at the offensive capabilities pushed into Ukraine, it was the Trump administration that reversed Obama policies not to give the Ukrainians offensive weapon systems, the anti-tank systems. You know, the Russia thing is always going to be a problem in U.S. politics. But this fight in Ukraine is a fight for the international community. Putin learned that he could do this with impunity in Syria under the Obama-Biden administration. He's now doing it in Ukraine again with impunity. This is in front of the international community. Civilians are being killed in shopping centers. Russia is using artillery and rocket systems to kill civilians, and it's not even on the front page of American papers. It's starting to fade from our...
But it was administrations, both Democratic and Republican. You had, after all, Donald Trump, who was the one who overnight decided to cut support to the Syrian Kurdish rebels.
Yes, and we were against that. We said, what are you doing? You're going to allow ISIS to come back. And you criticized Obama when he left Iraq and allowed ISIS to move in. So you can't do the same thing in northern Syria. And his foreign policy team told him that. People in the National Security Council told him that. You cannot abandon the Kurds. But now we're seeing the extradition of Kurdish leaders from Finland and Sweden back to Turkey so Erdogan can punish them. Erdogan's not just worried about the PKK. He focuses on the YPG in Syria also. He's also attacking Iraqi Kurds. So there's a lot to this. But our adversaries seek permissive environments in U.S. administrations. And yes, if they perceive Donald Trump's going to be weak on something, they're going to take advantage of it. But there is no doubt that Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow see the Biden administration as something they can take advantage of. And it wasn't Biden who got NATO back to back Zelensky. It was Zelensky that got NATO to back Zelensky. And then the Biden administration dragged their feet to get into this fight. We're now where we needed to be a year ago. You know, not a year ago, but about 4 months ago. This is where we should have been.
Let me
over the last year.
Sorry, let me bring in Joachim Bitterlich on this because we're running short on time. Right now, does NATO have the leadership it needs for this kind of crisis, war in Europe?
Let's say for the moment, yes. Even the Europeans are working in this field. And by the way, I've read today that German and French artillery is now used in the Donbass. It's let's call it a helping hand. What's more important for me is air defense from the American side, coming in by other means and ways than it has been done till today. We have been a bit more to reflect about this. But please bear in mind, Putin, in my eyes, would probably stop for the moment once he has got the Donbass, but only for a moment. Putin will not give up his goal, let's say, to take over the whole of Ukraine. We will have perhaps a ceasefire even, but Putin's goal remains to take over the whole of Ukraine. We are not, let's say, at the end of his story. Please, we are still what I call in the first phase.
Ines Sofsun, after all we've talked about during this discussion, would you say that this NATO summit that's concluded is a turning point?
Well, it's very difficult for me to say if it's a turning point. It's a development for sure, but there are developments taking place over here as well. And here I just want to add to a little bit to what the previous speaker said, because you say that Putin will stop once he gets full control of Donbass. But actually what we over here in Ukraine are concerned of is the ongoing and stronger rumors from day to day that Putin can restart the attack from the north, from Belarusian border.
Yes.
That is the threat that we are seeing every day right now, and this is something that we are living with every single day. So they can go back to Kyiv, which of course we have been preparing for, but again, there is just not enough weapons. So I just hope that with this NATO summit and with the promises of J7 and NATO summits of providing support to Ukraine as long as it takes, the leaders will realize that it better be short, not long. We don't want to live through this war very long. We want to go back to our lives, go back to our families and all of that. So again, as long as it takes is good, but it feels like the leaders are taking longer route to victory for Ukraine rather than the shorter one.
Catherine?
And that lives.
Catherine Norstrand.
Yeah, this is something that I heard a lot when I was speaking with Ukrainian officials of various parties in Kiev recently. This fear that they have that somehow Putin could seek to consolidate gains in the Donbass and the south of Ukraine and somehow freeze the conflict there for a while. A posture to say this, can we have a ceasefire? And the worry that especially Europe among the international partners would be willing to kind of set that up and to export some of the grain to ease the global food crisis and to look on that and to try and facilitate that. But the fear in Ukraine, people I spoke to, is that then he would just use a pause, a freeze in the fighting to reconsolidate, rearm, and then carry out an attack at a later date. So that's a really, really big fear that with Ukraine fatigue perhaps setting in among Ukraine's allies, that this kind of, if there is some kind of freeze in the fighting as a solution, that some partners would accept that.
All right, something we'll have to watch. Again, a development perhaps too soon to say, as Ina Sovsun said, whether it is a turning point. I want to thank you, Ina, for joining us from Kyiv. I want to thank Michael Prejin for being with us in the Washington suburb of Arlington, Virginia. Ambassador Joachim Bitterlich, Catherine Norris-Trent, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.